Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and in this video what I want to do is focus on one, how to update records in your database, how to delete records in your database, and some other kind of fun options and ways to kind of add data to your code or to your database. So again, I'm still in that same REPL that we've been working out of the last few videos. So I'm going to go open up my database. So I'm going to type in SQLite3 and then the name of the database, first.db, and now I'm here. So remember, we created a table. Select all from my second table, which had the following data. That's where we left off. Now notice the way it kind of lists it. Maybe that's not your favorite way of looking at the data. So first thing we want to learn is, how can I change the way the data gets printed? There's an option called mode. Okay, and again, whenever you're dealing with SQLite specific settings, it's a dot in front of the thing. Okay, this is not an SQL command, it's a SQLite command. So it's a command that's particular to the database, not to the SQL language. Okay, so if you go to Postgres, the Postgres commands are different and the MySQL commands are different, even though the SQL language is the same. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's always sort of two sets of things. You gotta, as you go from database to database, there's the SQL language for sending queries, update tables, create tables, and then there's sort of like, how can I configure the actual database software? So in this case, this is a SQLite specific command, but if I use this mode command, and all databases generally have similar commands, just different syntax. So I do .mode, it's currently in list mode, so that's why it lists the data the way it's listing it right now. I can change that mode. So I could change it to, so for example, I could change it to CSV mode, which means comma separated. Okay, and I specify which table I want to set that to, my second table. Okay, and now if I do select all from my second table, see now instead of showing it to me as a list, it's showing me in a comma separated form. I could also do JSON. So .mode JSON my second table. So now whenever I query my second table, the data is going to come out as JSON, JavaScript object notation. So I do select all from my second table. And see, that's JSON format, where it looks more like a JavaScript object, which is really popular for the way data is sent back and forth between different applications. And then the final mode, well, there's probably more modes, but this is sort of the last relevant one. .mode table, so it's going to be put in as a nice pretty table. .mode table, and again, my second table. Okay, and then if I do select all from my second table, oops, forgot the semicolon. And see, I get this nice table that gives me those column names. So we're going to work with that. We're going to leave it at that because that's sort of a nice display that's a little bit more practical for our purposes going forward. Okay, but depending on what kind of application you work with, you may care to see how the CSV mode looks like, because you may end up wanting to write the data to a CSV file. So kind of seeing it printed out, so that way you know that's going to write to the CSV file correctly or write to a JSON file correctly, can be really useful. But when I just want to like interpret and look at the data, the table mode is probably going to be the most aesthetically pleasing. So now I have that in the table mode. Great. So again, we have 3 records: Alex, Bob, and Susie. So let's talk about updating. Okay, so let's say I want to take Bob and make it Bob Jr. Okay, so that would be, I would use the command update. I specify which table I'm updating. So I'm updating my second table. So that's the table I'm updating. And the change I want to make to the table is with the set keyword. Okay, so I want to say, hey, I want to set the name field to equal Bob Jr. Okay, set the name to Bob Jr. But do I really want to set, if I do this, I'm going to set all of them to Bob Jr. Okay, what I want to do is specify which record I want to update. So I'll do where, and I can pass in any where clause that I could at any other time. So I could say, hey, only update the ones that start with A, or update the ones that have an ID above 1. But I want to update a specific ID. So I'll say, hey, update the one whose ID equals 2. So I'm saying the one that has the where tells us which ones to update. The one that has the ID of equals 2. Set will tell us what is the update. Update tells us that we're updating. Then again, I end that with a semicolon because all SQL commands begin with semicolons. And then let's check to see if the change worked. Select all from my second table. Okay, and look, Bob became Bob Jr. So it worked. So that's how you update a record. Okay, if you want, pause the video and change into one by one, change Alex to Alex Jr., change Susie to Susie Jr., or change them to whatever name, just, get a couple additional rounds of update. And now what if I want to delete? So let's say we want to remove Bob, then we would use the delete command. Okay, and you say, hey, I want to delete, and then you say, which table? So I want to delete my second table. So that's the table I want to delete from. But I don't want to delete every record. So I'm going to say where ID equals 2. So I'm saying, hey, delete from my second table where ID equals 2. Okay, I think it's delete from. Let me just confirm that. Nope, wrong window. Here we go. Delete. The delete from? I'm pretty sure it is. Delete from, yep. Yep. Delete from my second table. I was wondering, like, that didn't sound phonetically make sense. Delete my second table. Delete from my second table makes a lot more sense because, again, these are supposed to read like a sentence. Delete from my second table where ID equals 2. So that's going to delete the record that has the, and again, see, I got no feedback. So that means it worked, or should have worked. So let's check. Select from my second table. There you go. Now here's the thing. You might have like an Excel file that you would want to add to your database. Like, instead of me having to sort of write all these manually. So what you can do generally with Excel or Google Sheets is you can import data. You can export the data from those sources as CSV files. Okay, and then you can take those CSV files and import them in. But just so you can understand what a CSV file is, and again, CSV stands for comma separated values. Comma separated values. And again, so we'll do a couple examples of this. Let's actually create a CSV file. So let's say add file. So right now we have 1 Alex, 3 Susie. So I'm going to go over here, click on this to create a new file in the same folder with everything else. Okay, and I'm going to call this names.csv. So what we're going to do is, and I'm going to move this back over here. So first, what we got to do is, again, take a look at our schema. So we always have 2 values. ID is the first one, name is the second one. So at its simplest, we need to make sure we match that. So I'm just going to start from the number 4. So we're going to say, hey, I want 4 to be Steve, 5 to be Johnny, 6 to be Sophia. Okay, and there we go. We have a comma separated value. So again, we have the first value. So each row represents one record, and then the values of that record are separated by commas. There are other versions of this, tab separated values, semicolon separated values. You can use any what's called a delimiter. So the comma is referred to as the delimiter. It's the thing that separates things. Okay, so in this case, but a comma is a typical one. The only reason why you would not use a comma is because you use commas in the values, which can sometimes make parsing CSV files really, really complicated. So you might use like a tab separated file. So that way you can use commas and not have to worry about commas separating and then commas like in your values. For example, if you had like a first and last name field where the last name was first, then first name second with a comma in the middle, well, that would kind of create a problem. Cool. So we have this file. So how would I add this file to this database? Well, for SQLite, and again, each database is going to use a slightly different command because this is a database specific command. So I'm going to use .import. This means that, hey, I want to bring in a file. So then I give it the name of the file. So names.csv. And I'm going to say, hey, which table do I want to add it to? Okay. And in this case, I want to add it to my second table. Okay. So then I got an error here. It says multi-character row separators may not be allowed. So what's complaining about is I put this space after here. So let's get rid of that. Let's try that again. Dot import names.csv my second table. Because what it's trying to do is trying to determine what the delimiter is. Like, because again, there actually are CSV files that are using semicolons as the delimiter or tabs as the delimiter. They may not be called. There are TSV files, tab separated, but sometimes you just call it CSV and it's not a comma. So what it says, like, hey, it looks like you're doing a comma and a space, and that doesn't quite work for us. So we want you to fix that. So we fixed it in the file. So now I'm going to try to run this again. Okay, still doesn't like it. Okay. So I think what we may have to do is we actually have to change the mode so that way it matches the kind of file we're trying to import. So let's try that out. So we'll change the mode to CSV on my second table. Okay, and then we're going to do the import again. Import names.csv into my second table. And see, that time it works. So yes, you do have to make sure that the mode in SQLite matches whatever data you're importing. So now if I do select all from my second table, oops, forgot the semicolon. See, now we have all the data in there. Okay, so again, the idea here is that you could go use like something like Excel or Google Sheets, have all this data organized, but then you can easily import that data into a table. And I think you can even create a new table right from the data, so that way it automatically kind of matches the basic schema of it. The problem with like CSV and JSON files is they don't necessarily have the schema. They might think that a particular number is a string or a date is a string. So then you have to go back and like alter the schema and do transforms. That's where like more advanced file types like Parquet become pretty useful. But to do that, you would have to that's where you'd probably want to bring Python in. And you would use something like PyArrow where you could load your CSV and then transform that into a Parquet file that has all the right column types. Okay, and then you could load the Parquet file, but a Parquet file is a whole other file type that's really kind of meant it's really fast for analytics and stuff like that I don't want to get too deep into right now. But essentially what it does, it organizes your data in a more columnar way in a binary format that's really fast, but I wouldn't be able to open it up and just edit it like this. Okay, so CSV and JSON files are really convenient and really easy to work with, which is why a lot of times if you're dealing directly with the data, you're probably working there, and then you might have a data engineer who takes all that, turns it into a Parquet files or Avro files or ORC files, and then on the other end you might have data science and data analysts who will pull the data from those files and analyze it going further. Okay, just to kind of give you some big picture stuff. Okay, but we just imported a CSV, so that's cool. Now let's try a JSON file. So let's create another file called names.json. Okay, and let's try showing you how to write a JSON file. So in a JSON file, what we want to do is that what we'll do this as an array. I think we're going to want to do this as an array. It's either going to be an array or row separated, but we'll see. And then what we'll do is use curly brackets for each row. Let's actually take a look at the previous JSON output. That'll give us an idea of how it's going to want it. So yeah, so it's going to want it inside in square brackets. So square brackets represents the list of items, and each curly bracket represents a single item. And then each item, we have to describe the data inside that row. Now this is where like JSON's not going to be the most convenient format to like write out manually, because now I have to write out ID manually each time. So it's going to be like ID, in this case we're doing ID 7 because we're going past that, and then I would do comma. So that's the first property, and then name Jake. Okay, and then I would, once I'm done with this particular record, in the again, the square brackets represent the list of records. Each curly bracket represents one record, and then each key and value inside of it represents the data for that record. So I would do a comma to separate the next record, and then again I would make curly brackets, and we would just do ID again, and say ID 8, name rows. Now the nice thing about JSON is that because of the way the notation works, it's actually going to be probably better at being able to kind of guess what type of data certain fields are. So it's going to be able to much better figure out that this is an integer, not a string. And, basically piece these things together, while that's not always as clear with the CSV file. So JSON, but the downside is, again, I'm typing in ID over and over again. I'm typing in name over and over again, and that can be kind of tiresome. Okay, but we created a JSON file, so we're going to do that. Just like before, we're going to change our mode. Oops, I just deleted everything by accident. There we go. We go back over here. Dot mode JSON my second table. And where would you be getting JSON files from? You might get JSON files as like configuration or support files. Sometimes you'll find data sets that are provided to in JSON. If you're getting it from an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet, you're probably going to get that more as a CSV file. If you're getting it from an application, you might get it as a JSON output. Like, I know, being someone who's worked a lot with web applications, I love getting my data in JSON. From a programmer standpoint, it's really, really great to work with, because it tidies up really well into sort of the way I have to write my code, but may not necessarily make as much sense for someone who's working with spreadsheets. So you're getting the data from different people in different formats, and you're just trying to bring it to this database because you just want to work with the data. Okay, so dot mode, actually we already did that. So then we want to import, so dot import names.json, and then we're going to say into my second table, and let's see if that works. Okay, expected 2 columns but found 1, filling the rest with null, insert failed, data type mismatch. Okay, so let's see here, that did not like that. Let's take a look. See here, importing JSON files into SQLite 3. I have one guess of what it might be, but let's take a look. Okay. Nope, that's using a visual tool. I want to see how we do this. How to convert a JSON file into an SQLite database. Load JSON file with an array of objects to SQLite. JSON API. Here we go. Nope, that's just someone else doing it. Here we go. So mode CSV. Okay, so that's what we just did with the CSV file. Oh, the convert JSON to CSV. Oh, okay, so we're gonna have to convert the JSON to CSV first. Ooh, okay, so I guess we can't directly import it. Okay, well, at least now you know what a JSON file is. Again, different databases will have different functionalities, but as you can see, like, converting this to a CSV file wouldn't be the hardest thing in the world. So at the end of the day, you really want a CSV file to import. And again, a CSV file is going to look like this. Okay, so you can see kind of the difference. Comma separated values versus this JavaScript object notation format. So again, the kind of overview, the things we learned, again, you use the update keyword. The update keyword if when you want to update a record. Okay, the set will determine what is the update. And of course, where will select the thing you're trying to update. Delete from will allow you to delete from a particular table, and then you can use where to say, hey, what is it that I'm trying to delete? Again, we can use mode to change the kind of output when we do our queries. How does it appear? We can use the import to import things like CSV files into our database, so that way we can take all that data we have from Excel or from Google Sheets, export it as a CSV file, then load it into our database so we can use all the cool query features that exist within SQL. And yeah, and then we've learned the difference between CSV files and JSON files, which are going to be two very popular data formats. Parquet, ORC, and Avro are going to be other files if you go deeper into the data world that you'll learn about. There's other ways of displaying information, such as TOML, HCL. One is escaping me at the moment. TOML or YAML. But those are going to be more for configuration files, probably less an issue here of how am I going to go get the data and put it in my database, more than like how would I configure my database, which is a story for another day. But these are all terms to be familiar with. But yeah, so that's that. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Ciao.